Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Sportsocology Show. I'm Bill Knudsen, and I'm the host of the Sportsocology Show. I want to start off by just ending the football season, a little postscript, if you will, to the Super Bowl. It was a very, very disappointing end to a really good football season. As you may have heard, I predicted the Broncos would win 28-24, and not that I'm surprised that the Seahawks won. They're a great defense. They've got talent on offense as well. I just expected a close game. And from the first play of the game, when the ball was snapped and Manning wasn't ready for it, and it went into the end zone for a safety, I said to the friends that I was sitting there watching the game with, this game is over. Because something like that happening to Peyton Manning and that offense, as great as he is and in control of that offense as he is, when that happened on the first play of the game, I was just like, this is going to be the Seahawks' day. And I was rooting for the Broncos, so I wanted to be wrong, but obviously it was totally the Seahawks' day in every aspect of the game. They just looked like they were ready to play, and I'm not saying the Broncos weren't ready, didn't prepare, because you know they did. You know Manning worked hard and prepared. But the Seahawks just totally outclassed the Broncos, and there's nothing else you could say. I'm a little bit depressed because now I know there's not going to be football till like September 1st or somewhere around there, whenever the first game is that the Seahawks will be hosting. But I'll move into more basketball, following my New York Knicks and following my New York Islanders. Neither one of them is doing very well at all. But I'll follow more basketball, more hockey, and spring training. Pitchers and catchers are showing up in like 10 days or maybe 2 weeks, something like that. And my mighty New York Mets, who I don't expect to be very mighty at all, but everybody's excited at this time of year. They always think, maybe your team will catch fire and get in, because there's always somebody that does that in baseball. So I'm hoping it'll be my Mets. I want to go back a couple of weeks to something that happened that I really haven't had a chance to address on any of my shows this week. I want to go back to the Hall of Fame voting in baseball. Now, of course, Maddox, Glavine, and Thomas deserving, of course, got in. But what I don't understand is, how has there never been a player to get 100% of the vote? Is there somebody out there that can actually tell me a legitimate reason why Greg Maddox didn't get their vote, or Tom Glavine, or Frank Thomas, or back in the old days? Really? Hank Aaron wasn't deserving of everybody's vote? Willie Mays, Nolan Ryan, Tom Seaver, Babe Ruth, on and on and on and on. Are you kidding me? What goes on in these writers' minds and people that are voting like this? It's so ridiculous. I think that's part of the reason that Dan Le Batard, the writer down for the Miami Herald, and he's got a show on ESPN, highly questionable. I think he was so frustrated with the way that this voting happens and the ridiculousness of it, and how stupid some of these writers must be to not vote for certain Hall of Famers, that he let the fans do the voting for him. Now, keep in mind, the ballot came back to him that the fans voted on. He looked it over, made sure it was legitimate, that they weren't putting guys that had no business on a Hall of Fame ballot on there. And then he signed it and submitted it, so it wasn't just totally crazy, and he had no idea, what was being sent in with his name on it. And they actually did a very good job. The fans did a lot better ballot than some of these so-called expert baseball writers. So I understand why the Hall of Fame took Dan Le Batard's vote away, because, you can't really, advertise to the fans that you're, advertise out there that you're giving your vote to the fans, I should say. But I'm sure that every writer talks with family, friends, but you just have to do that, not in the public eye. But I understand why he did it, and I actually agree with him. But I don't understand a couple of people that got left off. Now, granted, I'm a New York Mets fan, so I wanted to see Mike Piazza get in there. And all of his numbers are certainly way beyond Hall of Fame worthy. Over 300 career batting average, 427 home runs, 1,335 RBIs, 2,127 hits, and his career average was actually 308. Now, I understand. Every time the big steroids, things came out where they were announcing all of these players that were linked to certain people selling the illegal steroids, Piazza was never on any of those lists. So I don't know how anybody could keep him out because they were suspicious that he was on the list. All the other guys, Clemens, Bonds, Sosa, McGuire, Palmeiro, they were always mentioned on the list, or they've already admitted that they took steroids. So I understand if you don't vote for those guys. But Piazza was never involved in any of those scandals, never named in any report in any way, shape, or form that I've ever heard of. And I think I'm pretty knowledgeable of the situation. I have never heard of Piazza being mentioned in any of these things. The only thing I've ever heard about Piazza was he had a little acne on his back, which I do admit is one of the many symptoms of steroid use. There are, I don't know how many, but I know there are many. And that is one of them. But I have known people personally, and I'm sure there were many, many people that have acne on their back that have nothing to do with steroids. So to me, that is an incredibly stupid reason to keep somebody that is extremely worthy of the Hall of Fame out, my New York Mets bias aside. So I don't understand that. Like I said, I get why Clemens, Bonds, Sosa, McGuire, Palmeiro, they're either admitted steroid users or, like Bonds' case, I mean, he just swelled up, weight, muscle, his head, everything just got so much bigger than the skinny guy he used to be that it was kind of obvious that even a lot of weightlifting and a lot of hard work couldn't get you to be like that. But steroids don't give you that kind of talent. Bonds was a Hall of Fame player even when he was skinny, before he started all of this. It didn't give him his great eye at the plate and his beautiful compact swing. It didn't give McGuire the home run power that he had, because last I checked, as a skinny kid, he hit 49 home runs, which is still the record for rookies. So, and there are a lot of guys in all sports that use steroids. It helps you in the healing process. I get it. Okay. It doesn't make you a Hall of Famer. These guys are Hall of Fame talent without the steroids. So I always have a problem with not putting them in the Hall of Fame. If you want to put them in, put an asterisk or some sort of sentence under their bust or something that says they're admitted users or highly suspected of it. I have no problem with that. But these guys deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. But there are people that have their biases. They didn't like Barry Bonds. They didn't like Roger Clemens because they weren't really nice to the press or fans or whatever. But it's not about that. It's what you did on the field. That should be the major reason that you either get in or you don't. But back in the day, they had their equivalent of PEDs as well. Guys in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they'd be out drinking all night and doing whatever they were doing. They would use amphetamines because they were tired or they were a bit hungover or a bit sore or whatever. And the amphetamines, they're uppers. They would get you energized. They would wake you up and get you ready for the game. Is that not a performance-enhancing drug as well? Because without those, you wouldn't have the energy, the strength, stamina, whatever word you want to use for it, to do what you need to do on the field. So even back in the day, they were using the equivalent of PEDs that they had back then. I also want to congratulate Maddox, Glavine, Thomas, of course, for getting in. Hopefully Piazza will get in one day. Craig Biggio was just a couple of votes short. he had over 3,000 hits in his 20 years, but I understand why some people aren't voting for him, because when you think of Craig Biggio, you think of a really good player for a long period of time, but was he ever dominant? Was he ever the best? And the answer to me is no. And the way if I think about Hall of Fame voting, and the way I would do it if I had a Hall of Fame vote, if I had to think about whether somebody was a Hall of Famer or not, they're not. Because I look at Maddox, in. Piazza, in. Glavine, in. Frank Thomas, in. No hesitation, no thought whatsoever. Those guys are in, even though Piazza is not in yet. But somebody like Biggio, I hesitate. A Jack Morris, for instance, I hesitate. I know he won more games than anybody else in the 80s, but, I just hesitate about it. And he was a big game pitcher, so I have no problem with him getting in, but his ERA in his career was almost 4. Excuse me. So, I don't know. He was great when the big games came on. Probably pitched maybe the greatest World Series game of all time, or one of them, back in '91, the Game 7 against Smoltz and the Braves. But I think about it, so if I have to think about it, I would vote no. So congratulations to the guys that did get in. Hopefully Piazza and a few other guys that are worthy will get in. It's like, how do they get in 10, 15 years after they're eligible? You're either a Hall of Famer or you're not. I mean, do your numbers change over the years? Are the numbers better 15 years after you retire than they were the moment you retired? I will never understand that. Hopefully somebody will explain that to me. You're either a Hall of Famer or you're not. Period. So let's get it together, guys. Vote for the guys that should be in. Put your biases aside. Put whatever reasons that I probably don't understand, and some of them are stupid, guys, just, taking advantage of the voting process. Put the guys in. You don't have to like them personally. You don't have to be friends with them. Put them in if they deserve to be in. I also want to congratulate the Hall of Famers in the NFL. My man Michael Strahan from my New York Giants. It's a beautiful thing. I'm glad he got in. Ray Guy, the first kicker ever. Now, maybe kickers, some people think they're not football players, things like that, and for the most part, they're right. We've seen how they make attempts to tackle, or they run away from tackles, or whatever. But Ray Guy was a difference maker. His booming punts back in the day with the Raiders, it was all about field position. He would put the opposition way back on their own end, and those great Raider teams of the 70s, great defenses they had, they would take advantage of that. So he was a real key in helping those championship teams of the 70s for the Raiders. Derek Brooks, for the Bucks, he was great for a long period of time. Walter Jones, great. Aeneas Williams got in, and I know he was a good player for a long period of time, and obviously people thought he was a Hall of Famer. I just never thought of him at that level. I knew he was a good player for a long time, but when I heard that he was in, I was kind of surprised by that. And I may be wrong, I don't know, it's just me, my humble opinion, but he just never seemed to be Hall of Fame level. Yeah, would I have put him in my Giants blue? Absolutely, of course. He was really good, but I just never thought of him as Hall of Fame. Kind of the same with Andre Reed. I know he caught a lot of passes for the Bills in the 90s. He was an important part of those Bills in the 90s that went to 4 straight Super Bowls. But again, a very good receiver. I just never thought of him as Hall of Fame worthy. Obviously he is, and the numbers point it out, but just thinking about him and watching a lot of his games during his career, I just never thought that he was at that level. But, obviously the powers that be thought that he was, so what can you do? Alright, I want to talk about a couple of more recent things now that I got a chance to air out some dirty laundry from a couple of weeks ago. As I said, as a lifelong Mets fan growing up in New York, a Mets legend passed away yesterday. And he wasn't a Mets player. He is a Hall of Fame baseball player. I'm talking about Ralph Kiner, who died yesterday at the age of 91. and had a 10-year career in the 40s and 50s. Actually led the National League in home runs 6 straight years. Went to the Hall of Fame as a player. Excuse me. And in 1962, when the New York Mets were first brought into the National League, he was on the original, on-air broadcast team, and he stayed there for 52 years until last season ended. And I don't know if he was a part of the upcoming season in 2014. I don't know if he was going to be a part of the broadcast in any way. About 10 years ago, he had a stroke and was limited over the next bunch of years, but he did do some games last season, and I'm guessing they would have had him on at least occasionally to broadcast if his health, would allow him to do that. But sadly, he passed away yesterday, and hopefully, and I'm assuming that the Mets will have his initials or something on their jersey for the 2014 season, because he's as much a Met as any Met that's ever played, broadcasted, or done anything. He was with the team for 52 years. So all Mets fans used to love watching Kiner's Corner, where he would interview the star of the game, whether it was a Met player or not. And we used to enjoy listening to that, and I have very fond memories of watching him interview the star player of the day. Not as much when it was an opponent, but he was always really good at interviewing people. He was very kind and a very nice, generous person from everything that I've heard. But all I know is I loved listening to him as a Mets fan, and all Mets fans, Mets Nation, we're going to miss you. Rest in peace, Ralph. Now, I'm going to move on to a little bit of NBA talk, because with the football season going on and through the playoffs and Super Bowl, I kind of put basketball on the back burner while all of that is going on. So now I can move on to move on to basketball, away from football. Can't really do much talking about my New York Knicks because they're 19-30. Excuse me. So there's not much to talk about that, the Knicks, except how disappointing they are. And I can't see any time in the near future that they're going to be respectable. Maybe trying to trade Carmelo Anthony and getting some draft picks or getting some good players back, trading with somebody that can help them. I don't know, but right now they're irrelevant in New York. And even the Brooklyn Nets, who are not that great either, they actually have a playoff spot at this moment. So right now Brooklyn is kind of the king of New York, but that's not saying much. Now the Indiana Pacers, that is saying something. I think they're the team to beat in the East, and yes, that includes over the 2-time defending champion Miami Heat. I said when the Heat won their 2nd straight title last year that they would not win a 3rd. I said that from the beginning. I said the Pacers were right on the cusp last year, and they're only going to get better. And they're proving it this year. They've got the size, they've got the youth, they've got the athletic ability, and I think this is going to be their year. I think the Pacers are going to win the East. They're young, they're hungry, they have everything they need to beat the Heat. Weakness on the Heat is size. As great as LeBron is, and as great as Dwayne Wade can be, if his knees hold up, they don't have the presence in the middle. Greg Oden is not the answer. You cannot count on Greg Oden, who's missed the last 2 or 3 seasons with the microfractures in both knees. His knees are not going to hold up. I feel bad for him, but he is not the answer at center, and there really is no answer at center. There are very few great centers, and none that I know of are available for the Heat to try and get. So I think it'll be the Pacers. Out west, the Thunder, they're looking really strong. Obviously, Kevin Durant is an unbelievable scoring machine. He seems to be unstoppable. Even LeBron says so. So the Thunder are out there in the west, but the Spurs, I can never count out the Spurs. I know they're a little bit older. And they probably should have won that championship last year. That Game 6 was an epic one that they blew it. They blew it, though. So I'm not counting the Spurs out just yet because they play the perfect brand of basketball. You know, everybody's involved, no superstars, no egos, no selfishness. They just take basketball the way it used to be, you know, in the 40s and 50s, fundamentals. There's a reason that they call Tim Duncan the big fundamental. They all have it. They're all about the team and winning. So I think it'll be the Pacers, and I'll give the edge to the Thunder right now because they will get Russell Westbrook back. So they'll have two powerful scorers. And they have younger legs. They're hungry because the Spurs have been there and done that. Not that the Spurs won't be hungry. But I'm going to give the edge to the Thunder right now against the Pacers, if I had to pick right now, but there's a lot of basketball still left to be played. There's no question about that. So it's anybody's game. Well, that's about all I have for this week's show. Please follow me on Twitter at Sportsocology. I'm on Facebook /Bill Knutson. That's KNUTSEN. And of course on YouTube, the Sportsocology Show. Please subscribe. When you subscribe, it'll let you know every time I put a show out there on the airwaves. And I would like for you to not only subscribe, but leave comments. It's only going to let me get better. Things that you want to hear, subjects you might want to talk about. So feedback is really important, not only positive, but if there's something you feel I'm doing wrong or I need to get better at, I just want to get better because I love doing what I do, and I want everybody out there to enjoy what I do as well and eventually get involved in it with me. So thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Please don't forget to follow me and do all of that. And have a great day. And I'll see you next time, America, wherever you are.